A warm welcome. The interconnection of nature and health, or the circle of health. That's what I want to talk about today. For those who don't know me yet, my name is Heidi Wichmann. I am a biologist and mostly known in the field of seaweed. And in this lecture, I want to point out some topics that, in my opinion, really need more attention, particularly with regard to health of nature and environmental protection. All the things that we are told that should be a solution in that field, I want to have a look at in a different way, or what literature there can be found, based on studies or in the so-called big media. In this lecture, I try to explain complex scientific processes for as many people as possible. And the shown sources that I give can be used for own research, to fill up some gaps, to be able to dive deeper into a field. Often there are only some keywords missing to find something, or a study where others are quoted, what can function as a new gateway. It is possible that some things are already removed from the internet. I put this together with the best of my knowledge and conscience. In any case, I don't know if it is still online or not. Then there is the possibility of a Wayback Machine or other things to have a look. Otherwise, this lecture is simply based on screenshots from studies and articles that I shortly present and explain what I, in connection to it, think about it. I don't want to dogmatically announce any new truth. For me, it is about seeing that there is more than we know, what did not yet arrive in public or just don't want to be seen. Because mostly of what we are surrounded from is not visible for our eyes. Substances, for example. Here, I think it is important to have a look at some points that still are there that are not very life-affirming from my point of view, and definitely have an influence on us and our health. Well, nature and health. How is this connected? We humans love to be inspired by nature. As they are engineers, for example, the helicopter is not without reason looking like a dragonfly, or also in medicine. These natural substances in plants, or which are finally produced by all living beings, microorganisms, plants, and also animals and humans, exist in a big number. These natural substances that, for example, are produced by plants can be classified in primary metabolites and secondary metabolites, what then is called a natural substance, roughly. The primary metabolites are something like proteins and fats that the organism needs directly to survive. And by the secondary metabolites, so to speak, secondary, it was thought they are not necessary for the direct surviving. What is not correct exactly. It is a very fluid and dynamic definition. These metabolites have the characteristic, for example, to have an antibiotic effect, to give a bacterium in the ground or in the ocean an advantage in relation to others, or to defend its territory. There is an enormous diversity, and we have not yet discovered much from it. It is mostly presented differently, and now there is a focus on geonomical science. But after all, there are incredibly many substances in nature, alone on a chemical level, that we don't know yet, that are not identified yet, and that can also not be identified so easily. But this does not mean that they don't exist or are not important. As I said, we humans love to be inspired by nature, also in medicine, and natural substances are the old wisdom about plants and herbs that ought to have a curing effect. It is thought that we don't have much to do with this anymore. But this is not true. Before Corona, there were over 60% of the average medicines that originated from natural products, that were inspired by them. They were found in a natural organism and then copied by petrochemicals. There used to be a focus on the ground, but also the ocean has metabolites, secondary metabolites, natural substances that are very interesting in this field. This is also where I come from. I have researched with seaweed substances. One should think that there is a lot of research, but that is not supported financially. Already in the past, it was said that this topic is over. There is nothing more. Well, anyway, the marine natural substances are especially interesting for some scientists because we mainly also are made up of water. And this metabolites, these natural substances in the water, of course, have to move forward in a different way to where they want to move to. They have a different environment. They are structured differently or have a different behavior. This is also not talked about, that compared to terrestrial plants that have the air, we take in secondary metabolites through the air. But in the cells, we are more like the ocean, and according to that, these marine natural substances have a better or faster effect in theory than the terrestrial, depending where it is researched. Examples for current medicaments that were inspired from marine natural substances, or rather they are, and then being reconstructed by petrochemicals when it is possible. There are medicaments licensed through the FDA and the EMA in this field. Here are some listed. And finally, also from the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, that is already used by carcinomas, pain, and Alzheimer's. Here, peptides, polysaccharides, and so on were examined, and here it is shown which are in the clinical phases 1 to 3. Due to this study, 8 are already approved marine natural products as medicaments, but as I said already, this has nothing to do anymore with the seaweed or where it came from. It is this single product that is produced from this organism and was discovered. 20 more ought to be in the pipeline. What frequently shows up are the terpenes, also by terrestrial plants. Who knows about it? This sounds familiar. But of course also marine organisms do it. And they are really widespread. And they also are signal molecules. The substances that are produced then are, for example, antibiotic active and have various effects. For example, that they are communication molecules, a form of language between living beings. It is a language. It's simply like that. They don't speak with words so that we understand it. It is a signal, a form of language. And we will encounter terpenes through thought this lecture. Well, Alzheimer experts greet a surprising approval of a drug for brain disease in China with hope and caution. This is not listed in the study. There are for sure also more. This was for the European area and actual for America, where this substance is in the clinical studies. But I don't know it exactly. In this case, China has a different approval in the treatment of Alzheimer or other neurodegenerative diseases. Normally, especially the research of natural substances is very active. In the past, in particular, also when I started to deal with it during my doctoral thesis, there mostly the anti-carcinogenic research existed, or even better, healing the complete cancer. Anti-cancer activities, so to speak. And there, the focus is on cytotoxic characteristics by natural substances. That is what I did as well. That is the first that you do. Is it antibiotical active or has it anti-cancer activity characteristics? I have not looked at each several medicament, but this is the main procedure that happens. In China, they did it different. Seaweed. The substance is called sodium oleogomanate and is from the brown seaweed, and in the Japanese and Chinese culture, generally in Asian countries, but also in northern, the consumption of seaweed has traditionally always been there. It is a traditional food product that belongs to the everyday life and to the classical diet for thousands of years. This is the direction that was taken, and one substance was isolated from it and turned into a medicine. This approach, and this is what's special about it, it works through the microbiome of the intestine. Exactly what was smiled at for many years, that the microbiome has an influence on the whole body and that a stomach, intestine, brain axis exists, so to speak. I will go into more detail on this soon. This has been used here, and that through the intestine, the microbiome of the intestine, the immune system, but also further up the inflammations in the brain are reduced. They are arguing right now. In Germany, you can't find any positive articles, but not all data are revealed. Who knows that anyway? In fact, there is a change of mindset in China. It is the first time that such a medicine takes this way of authorization, with classical and clinical studies, and so on. Here you also see this, sodium oligomanate. This project is called Green Memory. When you Google it, you can find out more about it, or the current status. As I said, the intestinal neuroimmune axis. Our intestinal has neurons running through it, and microbiomes, and many more things. And this work here is a review. Different stories have been put together, and they discuss it. What already many alternative practitioners, doctors specialized on environmental medicine, and shamans say about it, that the intestinal is very important. There's a new wind coming up. This can be told. One problem with natural substances is the procurement. When I look for animals or in animals for substances that are very rare, like the red bushy bryozoan, bryostatins are found in them that are now in clinical studies, when I have seen this correctly. Often it is a symbiotic bacteria, a friend that is necessary for surviving for both sides mostly. Not always, but then one has not discovered it yet. If one is lucky, they are the associated bacteria that are easily cultivated in a big number and that produce this one substance that then could be given to humans in a big range, viewed in this way. From this bushy bryozoans, tons would have to be collected from the bottom of the sea to gain only some gram of these bryostatins, and this for sure is not such a good idea. Nobody cares about this anyway, but here important. a problem of procurement. And I think one could pay attention on food instead. That's where we will have a look at now. Yes, the nutrition and our health have a lot to do with our food. And in our food, when it is grown healthy and the plant got everything that it needs and also was challenged a bit, that alone shows up in the chemical profile. The plant is further more than a chemical profile. But this is where we concentrate on right now. And what's interesting is that it is more and more recognized that food has an influence on the mood or on depression and furthermore. Here, the Harvard Health Publishing, the Harvard Medical School, has a not-so-bad article with some studies, how there are first indications that food has an influence on the mood, on depression, on health, by extension, on the body. Slowly movement is showing up in this field. For example, that sweet soft drinks, cola, refined cereal products, and red meat, and things like that seem to have an influence. I have written about that in my book as well, that it supports Alzheimer's. But basically, we all know this. And what is also every doctor telling us when we are sick? We have to eat more vegetables and fruits, eat more healthy. In any case, it used to be like that in the past. Everybody knows this, actually. But now the others follow what alternative practitioners, doctors specialized in environmental medicine, and shamans say for decades. Shamans, even longer. A change of thinking seems to happen slowly. That there is a loss of nutrition in our food is the topic of this article from the BBC. It is called How Modern Food Can Regain Its Nutrients. It used to be called a little bit different, How Modern Food Lost Its Nutrients. Here it is pointed out that our vegetable and fruit have lost a lot of nutrients. These are old studies from last century or the beginning of the 2000s, where already 50 or 60% of the ingredients like calcium, magnesium, and vitamins, for us essential elements, are no longer plentiful available. What has a lot to do with the farming, the cultivation, also what seed is chosen, how you grow it, and how this is put together. All this has a big influence. And the key is the health of the soil. Through the heavy farming methods, in different ways, for example with heavy machines that compact the soil, we should talk about humus soil there, and the immense use of pesticides and artificial fertilizers and so on, there was and is a negative development of the microbial diversity of soil. Hardly anyone pays attention to this. Furthermore, we hardly have real wild plants that also adjust the soil. There is a sequence. Nature thinks about that. And always the same farming methods have a price. Here, it is talked about that it is not due to a lack of nutrition in the soil that there isn't enough, but they are not absorbed. This is also not totally correct, but I will talk about that later. It always depends on which sort of nutrient we have been brought there or not, through an animal or plant or microorganism or insect, or through the wind or humans. And something that should be understood here, it is important that the soil needs to be healthy. Meanwhile, many people have understood that a nervous system exists in forest soil, the mycorrhizal network, mushroom network, and that through this, when a tree is not well, nutrients can be exchanged or warnings for predators, for example, a complex network that is exchanging, that is remembering, that forms friendships and so on. And this is for sure transferable or should be transferred to the other parts of the earth, to the soil. This, of course, also applies for meadows or something at best. When one recalls how it used to be in the past, there was forest everywhere, and people built up a settlement, and so on. But the soil was forest soil, everywhere, almost always, or something similar. Also the sediment of the ocean, that's full of life. Full of life. They are not so easily cultivated, these little things. The bacteria, just as an example. All of this for sure has an influence on the nutrient uptake. It turned out that the microorganisms are responsible for that the plants really can absorb and exchange everything. And then it goes on with the soil health and the earthworms. It is a very complex network. And if we could bring this back into the soil where we get our food from, just as from the forest, this would be the best quality possible. Because the nutrients are absorbed in a good way there, and transfer is happening. This is important. In this context, it is mostly talked about the mycorrhizal network, and I would really like to remind you not to forget the bacteria again. Plants also have a microbiome, and to this plenty of bacteria are a part of, and they are really, really important. By this symposium of constructing farming, there is a scientist that speaks about plant microbiome and her latest insights. And this shows how very important the bacteria are. They have researched with apple trees and apples, and they found out that there are 100 millions of bacteria in every apple. They are mostly in the core, in the seed and around the seed, and in the area from the stem to the stalk. And you take it in through the gastrointestinal tract. They are not all killed, and there are more positive than negative bacteria for our human health that get built into our intestinal, quasi our microbiome. They are also important for the soil as well, but there has to be a balance. The biggest mistake that, for example, people make that are dealing with effective microorganisms is it is no fertilizer like the stinging nettle. It is like an inoculation of the soil, but you inject it once at different places or locations. Just a single time, and then it should regulate itself. You do not always have to tip over afterwards. Sometimes you have to do this when something does not get into balance, but it also can backfire easily. If there is too much in it, the pH value gets disturbed, and this is not the most intelligent choice. So really think mindful and with nature. So the improvement of the nutrient uptake in the apple refers to this as well, what can be seen in this sheet, and also the well-known nitrogen fixation. But we will get back to that later. Someone who works a lot in this field is Professor Ralf Otterpohl. He wrote the book The New Village. He gives many lectures about it, makes lecture tours, and shows practically how important this humus soil is for a high-quality food, for healthy bees, for everything, that all living beings have enough to eat in a healthy form. He has done a lot, and the New Village is an approach how it could be possible in big cities, for example, to gain and grow local, healthy and nutrient-rich food with quasi jobs where you don't hang in front of a computer all day, but rather species appropriate. We are meant to move and not only to sit. Many know this. And we sit in front of the computer more and more. And so one would do computer works in the morning for some hours, then go out into the garden, take care of the trees, consciously plant trees that provide food. For example, chestnuts or walnut trees and so on. There's something happening in the area of Hamburg where the people do it for themselves. Someone else who is interesting in this field and brings the wild plants closer to us, and to this also the trees count, that's the biologist Markus Strauss. He brought the eatable wild plant parks into life, this idea. Wild plants that can be found in nature have a higher nutrient density and a higher nutrient content than cultivated plants. That's what he found out, and this is also very logical, if you follow this. Plants that used to belong to our diet in the past, like the stinging nettle, for example. My grandmother also said that the stinging nettle helped her through the war. Stinging nettle soup, you can eat very, very much. That used to be our original appropriate diet. We have not been hunters and gatherers. We have been gatherers and hunters. For sure we ate meat, but not as much as we are suggested. Because we haven't been so successful while hunting. Gathering was what was there, a rich buffet. It is also now very big in this world where a lot is destroyed when you get the eyes for it. You could think that there are studies about the content of magnesium in a wild stinging nettle. I wrote to Markus about it, but there is nothing. That is very sad. But it can be derived a little bit. Here is, for an example, a study that wild garlic has a bigger influence on the blood pressure and the blood chemistry by rats than normal garlic. As an example for terrestrial plants, we again have a look at the stinging nettle. Nearly everyone can classify it. At least when you touch it, you know that you found it. There are many subspecies, many different appearances. The stinging nettle is largely widespread. Europe, America, and not only there, and it has a successful distribution through nature. It is also very interesting for science. What we have seen with the example of marine natural substances, it also produces a lot of natural substances. Not only nutrient-rich, also natural substances. And in this work, a review about different works where it is spoken about the richness of nutrients and the medical potential of this plant. There is a lot in the preclinical study area, prostate cancer, anti-cancer activity in general, on blood pressure. There is also commonly spoken a lot about. But science follows after and supports it more and more. That's why it would be meaningful if we could integrate it into our daily food in a very good quality. Because one could profit from it a lot, and they are much more nutrient-rich. And when you go out into nature, Markus is doing a lot of work in this field and also trainings that is really great. The classification of the plants, it is grown where you are, it is local. You go out to get it, so you get movement and fresh air and all these things. Here is a summary of the advantages and the medical potential of the stinging nettle. For the ocean, of course, we have a closer look on the macro seaweed. It is similar there. I don't want to go too much into detail. It is meanwhile a bit more known. Seaweed is already used a lot in the food industry. What a lot don't know. Here it is shown that through the certain influences, the plant react faster and they get involved with different environmental factors and learn to deal with it, and have to, otherwise they could theoretically die. A plant wants to live. It pushes forward in life. They are much faster in this. And in theory, it is like that the natural substances are passed on to the humans in the food chain, so to speak. That wild plants can be a super rich nutrient bomb is here. Everyone who knows the Balearic Islands has seen them on the beach, these brownish grass that lies around in crazy balls and mostly is put to the side. This is Posidonia. It is a seaweed, what was named after Poseidon, and is very old. It is estimated that it can get nearly 100,000 years old and older, and filters high amount of pollutants, but also produces oxygen. The literature is a bit divided by this. In this article it is written that a square meter of Posidonia meadow, it is also named Neptune grass, produces as much oxygen as a hectare of the rainforest in the Amazons. That would be 10,000 square meter. There are also others that say they produce twice as much, in any case more. What is important here, they are strongly claimed by anchors. With this you can tear apart a lot. It takes a lot of time that the mycorrhiza network, the root network, is renewed. That is not so easy. But here this was collected, in fact the remains. It was not cut out and pulled out of the ocean and exploited, but the rests that were removed at the beach were collected and turned into a fertilizer, similar to the stinging nettle fertilizer. We talked about the stinging nettle. That is what I did not mention yet. It is an excellent fertilizer for plants of any kind. It does not cover everything, but is really great. I always use this and also different stuff, only natural things. Only for this the stinging nettle is useful, and also such remains that get wasted for biogas installations would be a meaningful fertilizer. What was tried out here with sprouts, green cabbage sprouts? Who does not know sprouts yet? They are meant to be very nutrient rich, and you sprout them at home. Then you have them really fresh without transport. This is also an advantage with wild plants. When you pick them up directly, they are still fresh and have no long transport distances, with a big loss of nutrients and changes of the plant microbiome. How it is shown in this lecture as well. Instead, they are made at home, but they can just be as good as the seed is, with its storage substances and the microorganisms that still exist in the seed, and also what nutrients are there, for example, also in aquaculture. The stinging nettle is also a good food plant. That what I am growing at home or wherever can just be as good as the environment. And we are not so far yet that it can be said that there was thought about possibly much. Some do it, but in general, it's about that your sprouts can just be as good as that it was growing on, or what sort of nutrients could come there in a later plant, for example. Here this was upvalued through this natural remains of Posidonia. Also here one needs to keep in mind it has a reason why nature sends it there, so to speak, why it lands there. It has to do with the nutrient cycle. Instead, when you don't want to have thousands of liters of fertilizer for sprouts, it could maybe also be something for the paved palm trees in the city. Because the nutrient cycle is pretty much interrupted there. Because fruits and leaves and what there is furthermore in this very little space of ground cannot bring a lot of food for the tree. That is later decomposing it
Earthworms take it and make it small, microorganisms prepare it for the tree, and it can continue as natural fertilizer, for example, just as an idea. Yes, another problem is that we have a total focus on single substances. Meanwhile, we deal, thanks to cannabis, with the entourage effect. That does not mean nothing less than the synergistic effect. Many talk about it. What is not accepted by many yet, it leads to that two substances, for example, terpenes, here we have again the plant communication molecules from the forest, they are used with cannabinoids against anxiety disorder and bad mood and things like that. As an example, here that it is more effective together than two single substances. Together, that's logical. How often we need cofactors by vitamins or other things. It is complexly thought by nature, and it can for sure also have a negative effect, because two harmful substances can be more harmful together than taken alone. In nature, nothing stays alone. This has to be understood. These connections react with each other, whether the naturals for the best, this entourage effect, or also to the negative. This is not researched a lot. A documentation that I find very good, that is some years old, is from 2013. It is not so easily to find. It's What Really Feeds Us. It's from the RBB. There you can find a good overview over affected persons, people that have been seriously ill, and choose different ways. Ayurvedic diet, wild plants, picking daisies and putting them into the salad, or vegetable juices and so on, and the complexity of the illness, where it is shown that a change of the way of life of the people has to follow. And also scientists that have made this natural substances research, mostly anti-cancer activity, for example, from raspberries, strawberries or cabbage vegetables, the state of research from 2013. There's also an article referring to this. What really feeds us? Is it possible to eat oneself healthy? Yes, well, natural substances. We can call it nutrigenomics. That's the new general term, where natural substances and factors of diet that are natural substances in a rough sense as well, are over the genes or gene readings looked at if the potential is in an organism. Nutrigenomics means what the genes have to do with the diet, that they get turned on or off, a form of activity or inactivity. Epigenomics are all factors of the environment that quasi play on the piano of our genes. And here we arrived, unfortunately, in the age of omics. The omics research, everything with omics, genomics in the first place, it is about, for example, by nutrienomics, that the whole, a pool of genes that relate to the nutrients and the food, and also activation and inactivation, depend on each other. This exists in different areas. It is differentiated. The Human Genome Project was not the expected success. I was a student at that time, and I was really trained for that. It was in the time where this was fully active. The epigenomic was then taken in enforcedly. It is not possible to ignore it anymore. Epigenetic factors. What are they? All what I was talking about and what I explained. These are all epigenetic factors. What's epigenetic? Epi means above the genetic. And this is food where primary and secondary metabolites belong to, weather, what tides we have currently, diseases, toxic chemicals, drugs in a positive and negative sense, depending on how you perceive it, alternative medicine, medical products, microbiome, sports, the financial status. Am I stressed or not? Everything can be stress or not, a positive or a negative, and especially relationships. All these are epigenetic factors. And also the mental condition, how we perceive the world. All this plays on the piano of the genes more or less strong. The founder of the epigenetic is Dr. Bruce Lipton. He found it out over 55 years ago. I think it was 1976, during his research with stem cells. In this time, when the genetic came up, he found out that the genetic is not simply determined in the cell core, and it happens what happens, but rather that the surrounding medium that was carrying little changes like sugar content, oxygen content, has decided what sort of cell is developing, whether it turns into a fat cell, a heart cell, a kidney cell, or what else. And it means that the genetics is not determined, but the surrounding is determining the outcome. He has described this very much in detail in his book Intelligent Cells. And I still remember in the past as a student, it was about the junk DNA. And we were told, I remember how I was sitting there, first or second grade, and our professor said this could all be cut out. That's junk. These are viral leftovers, rubbish we don't need. Yes, we are based mainly on junk. That's what the key message is for me. And meanwhile, it was found out that it is far more than junk and rubbish, the so-called not-coded DNA. To study the epigenomic or epigenetic better, the chronic kidney disease is suggested more and more, because a connection to the strong use of pesticides is likely to be visible there. And it is visible there that the genetic is controlled by something that is lying in the junk DNA. It is very clear. We call it junk. This is very common. Science is dynamic. It is always presented differently, but a theory is postulated where there are probably evidences, but it can be thrown over again. That is what science is about. What absolutism you see outside there has nothing to do with science. This has to be said here. Theses are thrown over, and that epigenetic has a much superior role. This comes out now. Also in the development of mammals. Here mice were chosen. They have inactivated a transposon, what refers to the so-called junk DNA, in pregnant mice, and 50% of the babies were born dead. These are small hints, but after all, it is always the same that the poisoning and the destruction of nature has negative aspects for all living beings, us as well. Here's something else that I found very interesting. It is about the epigenetic modulation of food, more specific from plants that can get functional food. Functional food, biohacking, call it as you like, biohacking, brain hacking, all these things are based on the research of natural substances and the food. We do not know it anymore, or we have never experienced it in our age, what it really means to live in an intact nature and to eat this food. And this is why healthy food, and there is paid attention on the synergy of single substances in the field, there this is seen as a hack. What is the normal condition? How it should be? That's how I see it. There is actually too much what we should not eat. And here they have made researches with weightlessness, that through weightlessness as an epigenetic factor, the nutrient content in plants was massively influenced in a positive way, and that through the epigenetic modulation of different factors, the nutrient content is determined. And here with weightlessness. What is also to say here is that nature always has a testing center. It is a testing center of new connections. There's a lot happening, of course, what we don't recognize. But if it is ecologically acceptable, we call it ecological toxicity, should be determined of some substances, this is decided during nature, when it is to some extent intact in the wilderness at its best. There it is tested on practical use. What is when you have a substance that at once kills a lot of other things, or the symbiotic bacteria? This will not win through. There is a quality testing of nature. And when you only go the laboratory way, this is not taken with. And we are not to some extent as good, I have to say. Others might see it different, but they have not understood the complexity of nature yet. Another epigenetic factor, stress, or as I said, this is the superordinate. Food can be a stressing factor when it is not good, but it can also be something very nourishing. Stress as an epigenetic factor, I have mentioned already, that this affects the health and the body, that it has a big influence, also permanent stress, that we are not so much aware. This is picked up in this article with different links and so on. It's really a good one. 5 or 10 years ago, this all looked very different if you said that stress had a big influence on health and on the nutrient uptake. And this is explained here, how this surviving mechanism is activating certain brain functions and bringing down others. Nutrient uptake, for example, or nutrients are just brought to the heart or the legs, because this is important when I want to escape. The idea of escaping while being in an unpleasant situation. And this also shows at least the power of thoughts. This can be found here. That's where I want to speak about the broken heart syndrome, what exists. Here we have a lecture of a cardiologist on how feelings change the form of the heart. This is also called the Takotsubo heart, and it then has this form like this right bowl. At the left you see a normal heart, and in the middle there is the sick heart, or the broken heart, literally spoken, and it then has the form like this bowl. It can happen that people, after a big loss, the death of a beloved one, for example, develop this heart. He tells about one patient that lost her husband after a long illness, Alzheimer's or something like that. At first, she had to manage everything. It was not conscious to her, but when the grieving period started, after around 3 weeks, she became heart problems. Only 50% of the heart were working. After some weeks, when she passed through that grieving period, the heart normalized again. You can also have this according to positive things. But this then are different regions in the heart that blow up like a balloon. Well, emotions, the heart, people can die because of this. The heart has a big energy field and is far more than we believe. And it shows how feelings and thoughts influence organs of the body in a good or bad way. Here, to the topic of autoimmune disease and stress, is there a link? For sure, there are a lot of ifs, but now the people open up more and more that there could be a causal link. We step further to other epigenetic factors that concern the health, and these are the 9 planetary boundaries. You've heard that a bit more often now. I came across this through Greg Braden. Thank you for this, Greg. The former leader of the Stockholm Institute has calculated with nearly 30 other scientists boundaries and named them that are there for us humans on this planet, functioning as a boundary and should not be crossed. This is an old shot. Here we see it. Freshly published now in September is this from 2023. For the first time, all 9 parameters have been determined, and for the first time, points like new substances like pesticides, plastic, chemicals, mineral oil, or whatever, this was also calculated now. And it was noticed that 6 of the 9 boundaries are crossed. In the green field in the middle, it is the safe operating zone. There we are safe. The problem is, when these big boundaries are crossed, there is not directly a fall over of the system, but over time these boundaries are crossed and damages that we can't undo can occur and stay. I can see them and they are there, and that one should put the focus on that, to bring it back to balance, to use our intelligence that is there already, and we partly have cool ideas. They often are not picked up, to support this, that nature can heal. In this image from 2023, you see the new entities. These are pesticides, chemicals, plastic, different things. There we have the biosphere integrity that is crossed massively. Climate change is still okay. Interestingly, we don't focus on these things. The biosphere integrity has to do with the biodiversity, with the life that exists on this earth. The species, the animals, the plants. Is this at balance? This also has an influence on the biochemical circles. We see this below. Here it was concentrated mainly on phosphor and nitrogen, but they stand here just for an example. They are 2 substances. Besides that, there is ferric and carbon circles that are meant to be the basic of life. And here there is also this study in Science from the 13th of September. The Earth has crossed 6 of these boundaries. We have crossed 6 of these boundaries on this Earth. Here again we see the planetary boundaries from the Helmholtz Institute in Germany. Without nitrogen and phosphor, we could not exist. We know this already, hopefully, and when there is not enough available, this has a limiting effect on life, what is logical. These planetary boundaries are not strict. They sit together and discuss. They are determined again and again. Does it fit? Is there something new to add up to it? They are much more meaningful to consider for nature and environmental protection than anything else, from my point of view. This could be a model to work with, at first. These planetary boundaries include chemical pollution, biodiversity, and geochemical cycles, which I would like to highlight here in more detail. Where is this stuff actually coming from? And what is important to know? Because many people don't know anything about this. And as it is shown here, environmental chemical assessment in clinical practice, unveiling the elephant in the room. Here, it is about the high chemical exposure of humans from the womb to the tomb. During pregnancy, mercury and other substances are passed from the mother to the unborn child. There is no longer the possibility to live healthy and completely free from the stuff. It is completely different. In this video, with Dr. Zach Bush about chemical farming and the loss of health, it is also about agriculture and the loss of human health. If the biodiversity of life vanishes and is being replaced with synthetics, you might protect this one single species of plant, but the other creatures are damaged, like herbs and other edible wild plants who are important for other animals, insects and so on. They are then gone. And many of these compounds are antibiotic active, what also many people don't know. You have to take a closer look, and the users then do not know this. Subsequently, the plant microbiome mentioned in the lecture of the researcher earlier is then also disturbed and changed. And this is then, of course, also found in the intestine again. There is a link, and she also spoke about organic and normal cultivation, how the delivery impacts the plant microbiome and subsequently us. We all have the tendency to think, well, I live on the countryside, here is still everything okay, the air, the water and so on. But the air is a connecting medium, so there is no glass dome surrounding it. Not every city and field has its own dome above it, no. The air is like the water in the ocean, a connecting medium. You can imagine birds in the air like swimming fish in the sea, for instance. When it comes to the sea, it is very often said that everything is toxic, but this is not that correct. There is still the strong purifier power of the sea. But it is not different with the air. There are chemicals like pesticides everywhere, whether it's Berlin or the countryside. Everywhere. And it's not only them. Particulate matter, heavy metals, and other things are in the air we breathe. Luckily, we have air purifiers like trees or algae in the sea, which decompose these substances biodynamically, if they are able to do so. Of course, I have to mention microplastics. Microplastics are a problem also in the sea, especially because it has found its way into the food chain. Fish, for example, mistake it for food, or it is mixed with photo or zooplankton and then eaten. What many people do not know is that plastic and, for instance, PCBs have a kind of love affair. They are magically attracted to each other. The fish who are eating this accumulate even more PCBs. There are also microorganisms that start to decompose the plastic particles. But it would be important to finally stop input so that they can process what is already there and not have to handle more and more. Nature has many ways. But many people do not realize that fish are strongly polluted depending on where they are from. Endocrine disruptors and thyroid autoimmunity are the topic of this study. There are also chemicals that interfere with the hormonal system. Hormone-active substances, also known as endocrine disruptors, can interfere with the hormone system of plants, animals, and also humans. A few are mostly commonly known in plastic, and we should take care that they aren't in there, if we can't avoid it. A connection with the use of pesticides is suspected, but this also occurs frequently in people who live near aluminium foundries or the petrochemical industry, for example. And here too, the connection is made that this does have an impact on human health and that is not positive. Here is a conversation from Dr. Shana Swan, endocrine disruptors, common chemicals that severely alter your hormones by after school. After school create really great videos, especially for visual learning. And here it is shown how common chemicals found in cosmetics, foods, everywhere alter our hormones. And not in a natural way, how it should be, but unnoticed by most. Almost no one pays attention to it. This is also about testosterone and the loss of fertility, especially in men, but things don't look much better for women. The influence on our hormones through these substances, and as we all know, this is hormonally controlled, right?
Here again the synergistic approach. It's always about this one compound can do this, the other single compound can do that. There's always the focus on the activity of a single substance. We know there are also all the compounds that affect bees. Unfortunately, this is usually not in a positive sense. Everything would simply be thrown out and a few years later it's said, oops, that's toxic. There are already many compounds in the environment and of course they also can react with each other. Keyword, cross-reactions. Here again, chronic kidney disease was used as an example. Glyphosate's synergistic toxicity in combination with other factors as a cause of chronic kidney disease of unknown origin. This has also happened to people without any family history in this regard. It's about Sri Lanka, India and other countries. The number doubles every 4 to 5 years. The origin is unknown. Several factors are discussed like nutrient deficiency, dehydration, but also these compounds. This is of course very stressful for our detoxification organ, the kidneys. And of course, the production of these chemicals has a price, a negative one for nature. Where large quantities are produced and accordingly end up in waste, water, etc., nature has to deal with it. Here, Hyderabad in India is shown as an example where vast quantities of drugs are produced, which are mainly used in the Western world. Here, it is the same, that the residents get very sick. Scientists, doctors, etc. agree that this is due to all the chemicals in the environment shown in this documentary from Arte. It's a hodgepodge of different substances where no one knows exactly what they do on their own and certainly not together. Keywords, cross-reactions. Nature is facing thereof always new challenges. Many people think that everything is tested before released. Of course, there are situations where this is not the case and negative effects are concealed. I don't want to accuse anyone of anything here, but this does happen and we know that it's all a question of money. There is a lot of money to be made. And it's a growing market. As you can see here, why the future oil is in chemicals, not fools. The petrochemical industry is the future. Especially here in Germany, you can see that. Everything electric and away from diesel, although I don't think that will be accepted.
However, in this report, from infrared, you can see Paula, who's showing how oil surrounds us. Everywhere. Fools, plastics, tables, drugs, food, additives, fertilizers, and on and on. It's everywhere. We come to another influence, be it as a planetary boundary through the input of chemicals and foreign substances, or as an epigenetic factor, and that is geoengineering. For decades presented as the worst conspiracy theory, so put tinfoil hats on. Since about 2 years, it's been introduced as the solutions for what? Climate change. Let's just block the sun. Yeah. And as we learned recently, photosynthesis is for idiots. No, it's not. The source of life is light, the sun. That's why I think it's very important to point the finger at this. The EU is in it. Here is an article from Die Zeit about it. There are various approaches or procedures to achieve this, but no one reports this, and it is not and was not controlled. You can spray out whatever you want. In Sweden, this was prevented, if I remember correctly. A few researchers were stopped before doing that. But who knows what has already been done, and I can see it with the naked eye, how the air now looks like, all the crap that is released up there. But I will talk about this a bit later. However, the sun needs to be blocked because it's so dangerous, or we all would burn to death. I have another hint here as well. Aluminium, for example, was a huge topic in naturopathy a few years ago due to the high aluminium concentrations in humans. This is of course also the case with bees or other creatures. Here, high concentrations of it have been discovered in bumblebee larvae. And we should always ask ourselves, where does this come from? Many people think that these geoengineering experiments are just taking place since a short period of time, that no one ever tried something like this. The introduction of foreign substances whose effects are not known at all. They are simply introduced into the atmosphere and no one knows the real effects on, for instance, the climate or biodiversity. And here we have an article from the German pharmacist journal, Meteorology. The weather is being turned. It is also about different things like HARP, that the weather manipulations are not overlookable, how it can be used as a weapon, that numerous companies have already used it. For example, hail planes for Bavaria, to make sure that there is no hail or thunderstorms. That different substances are brought in which influence the cloud formation and that, of course, come down to Earth at some point, be it with the rain, be it with the air. I would also like to mention that there are also microorganisms in the air that have to cope with this and certainly also play a role in the climate, and so on and so on. So we don't really know much about it, and we don't know much about potential cross-reactions, but it just gets thrown out there. So as I said, this article is from 2003, and it's not just happening yet, it was already done before. Here also at the German journal Stern, Rain by Pushing the Bottom, How Humans Manipulate the Weather. Several articles are in there about how it was used at the Olympics in China, how Volkswagen used it, and so on and so forth, what impact this had. A direct connection cannot always be made. In this case of VW, the Mexican farmers had no rain for a long time. This, of course, has an influence. Such compounds are simply thrown out. How does this behave together pesticides, which can also be found in the atmosphere, and so on and so forth? We do not know, and once again, just hope for the best. Mexico seems to be a country that is finally taking a tougher stand and says, not with us. I don't know how up to date that is. This article is from January 2003. I hope they stick to it. I wish it to them and that others do the same, but nevertheless we see it has been done for decades without any caring. Then it was ridiculed and now it's been served as a solution for climate change. with unforeseeable consequences, absolutely unpredictable costs of which we have no idea yet. In 20 years, we could then find out, as it happens in science, oops, it was different. Just think about the example of epigenetics. It could be like that here too. Although it is obvious that these introduced substances can also have an impact on microbial life, humus formation, the basis of life, and accordingly biodiversity, whether directly or indirectly through the soil and water, I mean all of this together has a negative impact. I only see problems in this regard. And then there are other things that are thought to save nature. Wind energy dispute. Wind energy is also an epigenetic factor, be it for nature or directly or indirectly for us humans. Many people are not aware of the costs. In itself, a good idea. But you also need special materials for it. That's one thing, but what does it do to the nature in which it is located? In this surprisingly critical documentary of the German TV channel ZDF, biologists and residents also have their say, the people who have to live with it. I lived close to these things myself, and I can tell you, it's not fun. In this documentary, it's about the fact that wind turbines are causing more and more disputes, because these huge machines are just simply placed without asking where people actually want to live quiet and peacefully, the countryside, and then they say that does not harm and is good for nature, but you experience something completely different. Many people do not know that at least in Germany, the strike number of birds that are killed because of them is not counted or documented. Biologists, conservationists, etc. have made a 500-page study with the result: wind power is in no way environmentally friendly. Not at all. To put it briefly, common buzzards seem to have a certain affinity to become a victim. The strike number in 1 year was 7% of the population. 7% have been shredded in 1 year. So, really shredded into the rotors. We also have a problem with bats. Please do not equate them with vampires. They are also very important for the ecological balance, especially when you have a lot of mosquitoes and other insects. They catch them. Considering their strike numbers, it's estimated that 200,000 bats are being killed due to wind turbines. First, it was thought that they hit against the rotors because they are moving. But it is something different. They were torn apart internally by the pressure or the suction, fall to the ground, and bleed to death. Their blood vessels were ruptured, really unpleasant. And in addition, there are all the other organisms that we do not see now, which are not yet taken into account. And here, infrasound, the inaudible noise that makes you sick. So as I said, I lived near them, and I was lucky that there were really stable thatched houses with stones between us. The wind mostly came from my direction, so that the noise wasn't often transferred by the wind. But when it did, it was very annoying. And I also had a huge old linden tree in the garden who damped that. Infrasound and health. There are more and more people who complain about symptoms. Here we see Dr. Stefan Kauler, who became aware of this problem through his patients, and that just the people who live there in the countryside show more and more health problems, abnormalities, and also damage. This simply has to be clarified, but that is not of great interest. Another big factor are the so-called longevity chemicals like PFAS. Many people don't know that either. No wind turbine or electric car without longevity chemicals. Without so-called longevity chemicals, the PFAS, which are also known to be harmful to humans, well, there is now some agreement that they are not so health-promoting. As far as I know, they are necessary for wind turbines to seal the ground. You'll have to deal with it yourself, but it's clear when I introduce it somewhere into nature that this is a source of toxins that will spread and influence life and finds its way into the food chain. Well, it just doesn't work without it, and you just have to know that. Forever chemicals about to be banned, I think that was dismissed. Ultimately, you have to know that it doesn't work without them, and many people don't know that. And there are also other challenges. So, where I come from, the northwest of Germany, there are wolves coming back. There are more and more conflicts. Of course, bears and wolves are potentially dangerous for humans and livestock. There aren't many forests up there in the northwest, and what's available is often shredded. The pastures can be also called green deserts due to the lack of wild edible plants. Some nettle, dandelion or else can be found, but it's not much. But who would believe that wolves, with their sensitive, highly developed hearing, would want to live in forests with, for instance, wind turbines? Same with the prey animals. And of course, they can smell very good. How do they react to all these chemicals? I find that all this does not really fit together. Let's continue to take PFAS as an example of long-lived compounds that are dispersed via aerosols, for example. People always like to forget that these substances become part of the cycles of nature, like the nutrient cycle. Many people do not know that there is a cycle of poison, which includes PFAS. They belong to the POPs. Please inform yourself what it is. I do not want to flood you with technical terms. The PFAS belong to it, and these are known to be harmful. It is often said first this or that is not harmful, and then it's the opposite. These POPs travel from a warmer location to a cooler one via a process known as global distillation, also known as the grasshopper effect. It has been shown, for example, that Eskimos and the animals that live there contain concentrations of these substances that could not be explained. What we apply here on our fields, where we think that concerns only us, reaches to the North or South Pole or wherever. It is not limited. We do not have glass domes over us. So we have a circle of poison, which in my opinion is actually a circle of health, but has been contaminated. Here, I would like to refer to the Gaia hypothesis. Many know it. It describes the Earth as a self-regulating organism, together with all living beings on it, with which it stands in some kind of contact and drives evolution. This resulted in the claw hypothesis. It has its name from the initials of the authors. Ultimately, it describes how increased solar radiation leads to increased phytoplankton growth and photosynthesis, which upregulates the substances DMSP and DMS. DMS is the smell of the sea and is an important part of the sulfur cycle, which, by the way, I also think is extremely important and subsequently influences cloud formation. It is regulating itself. Lots of sun, lots of phytoplankton, lots of stuff, more clouds. Much stuff and clouds, less sun, less phytoplankton and photosynthesis. Explained quite plain, dear colleagues, but it's for the general public. And I was researching on DMSP back then. I've mentioned it many times, but DMSP showed diverse potential in preclinical studies on many levels, from anti-cancer activity to neurodegenerative diseases, where I was active. These substances, DMS, the smell of the sea, and DMSP have already been very well investigated ecologically. They are also signal molecules. Seagulls, for example, use them to identify their food source, and other organisms tend to be deterred by them. It is a secondary metabolite. Here it was shown for the first time that these infochemicals, this secondary metabolite, is not only present in the water, but that these algae also release it into the air, comparable to terpenes when we are forest bathing, but I will get back to this later. It has a regulating effect. This dimethyl sulfide was recently discovered with a Webb Space Telescope on the planet K2-18b, together with carbon dioxide and methane. This has to be confirmed, of course. This can be a sign of life, because DMS is a byproduct of phytoplankton. The basis of life is photosynthesis. And that is pretty cool, I have to say. The influence of DMSP is discussed here. On the one hand, the anti-cancer activity in the field of neurodegenerative diseases, etc., but also as an epigenetic factor. For animals, fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and plants. And it has been found to play an important role and influences the substrate of DNA methylation. Epigenetics is mainly about methylation, acetylation, the histones as well. There are several things that need to be taken into account. By the way, it has a strong similarity to the neurotransmitter gamma-aminobutyric acid. In short, GABA. I noticed that back then. And neurotransmitters are not that uncommon in the sea. For example, certain algae produce dopamine and use it as communication molecules. Surprise! We have a lot in common here, including the ocean. Here we see forest bathing, vacation for the soul. German health insurances now also recommended forest bathing, which is quite nice. Ultimately, it's about natural substances, the terpenes, which were examined and identified as a key factor. Crucial is that the greatest effect was measured in the most ancient, deepest forest, not those that were destroyed or filled with pesticides or wind turbines. In the most ancient, deepest forests, the positive effects on the immune system, stress levels, etc., were the strongest. Higher immune cell activity, lower cortisol levels, and the effect lasts longer. The longer you stay in the forest and the deeper and more pristine it is, the more natural substances you are naturally exposed to. Only a few have been identified that are said to have this effect, but of course there are many more. And it's not just that, the smell of and contact to the earth, etc., but we'll get to that later. I spoke earlier about the complex underground network in forests' floors, the quality of which we should actually have our food grown on. There are mother trees. These are usually the largest specimens. They are connected to and communicate with hundreds of other trees via this network. They also release nutrients to others, such as carbon. In general, some trees also form friendships, others less so. But mother trees take care of everyone, but preferably their own offspring. It was found that by cutting down these mother trees, the forest generally takes much longer to regenerate. They are intelligent, communicate with their relatives and others through this huge network, exchange information, and are ultimately there to sustain life. Let's move on to the smell of rain. Everybody knows that smell. Its name is petrichor. The active compound is called geosmin. It's basically the scent of rain and lightning. It was formed from ozone, which is created by lightning, etc. We are very sensitive to the perception of the smell. Only a little amount is enough for us to notice it. I think it was 4 in 1 billion particles. Most people find the smell pleasant. Geosmin is also the bitter taste that we know from beetroot, for example. The smell of the earth, too. Geosmin was tested on honeybees. It has been shown that low concentrations have a positive effect on aggressive behavior, and they're totally chilling, so to speak. At higher concentrations, this effect disappears and they behave normally. At least it has a behavior regulating effect on bees. My aim is to see that these natural substances can also regulate behavior. The visual, of course, too, and is simply also an epigenetic factor that plays on the piano of our genes. How smells become long-term memories was also a topic here at the University of Bochum. But what is really interesting is this conversation between two neuroscientists. How smells impact our hormones, health, social interactions, and behavior. Of course, this also includes the good smells of nature, natural products, which we may not notice directly. On the chemical level alone, we are surrounded by uncountable numbers of natural products, but also human-made stuff where we don't know what it actually does. These new compounds didn't pass nature's practical test. Natural substances have gone through this. But let's move forward in regard to the 9 planetary boundaries. Number 3, the nutrient cycle, or the mentioned especially nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. Based on current knowledge, they are the most affected. Here, I would like to talk about the nutrient cycle. The nutrient cycle is based more on the fact that this input occurs massively. Nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and iron, as I mentioned earlier, are the basic elements of life. A lack of these naturally has a limiting influence on life when there isn't enough or everything is messed up. Here, they took a closer look at whales in particular and their role as marine ecosystem engineers. They are important not only because of their sometimes enormous size when turning over the sediments in a physical sense, but also by distributing nutrients with their large amounts of feces, the tsunamis. There is a transport of nutrients in the world, which also includes the giants. These have declined massively. Whales' carcasses on the sea floor is also bringing nutrients there. But also up from the depths and moving through the various layers of water. This circulation brings the phytoplankton into the photic zone, where they can then carry out photosynthesis again, producing oxygen for us. This complex interaction is becoming more and more discussed. The nutrient cycle has something to do with us. That's absolutely clear. This complex interaction is becoming more and more discussed. The nutrient cycle has something to do with us, that's clear, because we have a lack of nutrients in our food and plants, and that is also a problem. We do have factory farming and tons of liquid manure, especially in northwest Germany. I know what I'm talking about. I lived next to a pasture, but that's just from one species of animal that was usually filled with antibiotics to avoid getting sick, which is locally found in the feces and then in the soil and can affect biodiversity, etc. Due to the loss of animals, especially the large ones, the input of nutrients via the feces as fertilizer for the plants is logically not sufficiently supplied or changed. It may be that we have more animals overall in biomass, but that has nothing to do with natural diversity, especially in the form what these animals excrete individually, through feeding behavior, through migratory behavior, where they are flying, and so on. The fish eats plankton. The bird eats the fish. So does the bear. And they carry nutrients to different areas where the plant is getting it. It is a sophisticated system. And now we know that whales play an even more important role than was assumed in 2015. But as I said, I've talked about it and written about it many times. Here you can find an article I wrote at Epoch Times Germany from 2019. Health. What do whales have to do with our nutrients? There are more. Many thanks to my friend for the picture. The German Ärztezeitung published the article. We need more penguins. Here's the study. Penguin feces contain a lot of iron. And the iron deficiency in the water is due to what? That's right, loss of penguins. So here too we see slight change in the perception that we depend on other living beings. Large herbivores can prevent massive wildfires. I'm talking more about those that arise naturally, but also those made by humans. The animals remove the undergrowth and dry plant material, which of course promotes this. But they also form paths and create pools, each species specific, natural barriers. Here, particular attention was paid to the wild animals of Africa, which were also severely decimated. Locally, this means the fire can burn better. Large herbivores are simply important. You just always have to see the bigger picture. They are not just simple sources of meat, they also provide protection against fire or ensure biodiversity and so on and so on. The nutrient cycle or sulfur cycle or nitrogen cycle, one always goes into the other. It belongs together. As you can see from this example, it's not only about the nutrient cycle, but also about protecting nature. Nature has developed it this way, and it worked. This can also be seen as a form of biotechnology. It's also bioengineering, what whales do. We don't need any artificial stuff for that. Substances are brought in and the best is hoped for. Of course, these also arrive in our bodies or the food chain. What you put out at the top will eventually reach the bottom. So, we have many factors that play on the piano of epigenetics and are simply important for our health. And that also includes, surprise, surprise, the sounds of nature. Here you can see a study about a synthesis of health benefits of natural sounds and their distribution in national parks, US national parks, and of course seeing natural landscapes are also important and haven't been mentioned yet. As you can see, I'm already at slide 90 and I could go on for hours. It's just important to me to see that this connection, as subtle as it may seem, is simply important. We are natural beings. We are not cyborgs. We need natural building blocks, not this artificial stuff. And if we don't get natural building blocks anymore, it's quite clear that at some point we don't feel good anymore. In which directions do we want to go? Conservation and regeneration are important, but the way things are being done now are no real solution. However, new things are always being discovered. I won't go into bioacoustics in more detail, but it was found that stressed plants do make noises. Tobacco and tomato plant emit ultrasonic clicking sounds. They carry information. They are warning others. They draw attention to themselves, but we just don't get it. And just because we don't notice something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. All the secondary metabolites that are floating around everywhere, showing great potential in preclinical studies, but are not being investigated further for whatever reason. Those that are given to us naturally and free of charge have an influence, and we just can't see them. We can't see frequencies either. We have a tiny field of vision, a tiny perception when you see the spectrum as a whole. We have a tiny visible spectrum and think we know everything. But this is not the case. We need to devote more attention to the topics that we cannot see. This includes acoustics. And it's not street noise that's healthy, but natural noise. I still remember being in the rainforest, without electricity. At night, it was louder than I ever experienced before. The background noise consisted of animals and insects, and although it was so loud, I slept deeper than ever before. I don't have trouble sleeping, but that was something different. A very deep sleep. And I think we need that. Nature, natural substances, epigenetic factors surround us everywhere. all day long, whether we are aware of it or not.
Naturinhaltsstoffe, epigenetische Faktoren. Sie umgeben uns alle. Immer, den ganzen Tag, ob wir es wollen oder nicht. Ob wir uns dem bewusst sind oder auch.
Let's come back to natural products and drug development. This is what has been known for thousands of years. Knowledge that was passed down by wise people in, for example, indigenous tribes. In my experience, what I learned from them is true. I've been lucky there too, regardless of whether it was Wolf-Dieter Stoll in Germany or Don Agustin in Peru. Our modern way of life is also addressed, separated from nature, and that at some point this leads to psychological disorders, because we are designed to live naturally.
And here I would like to talk about the post-Avatar depression syndrome. To summarize it briefly, people who have seen the film feel a sadness after seeing how the Na'vi live there in harmony with nature, even with physical connection to animals, plants, etc. I endured watching the film just recently. Who knows me, this was not so easy for me. I don't want to spoiler too much, so I will keep it more general. In connecting the dots, I'm thinking of genetic memory. We all know that genetic memory exists. Well, scientists explain it differently. But let's just agree on life support or survival instinct. What if this is being switched on? We as humans don't know what it means to be in an intact environment. We don't know that. Even if we could repair everything right now, or at least make it better, we don't know what it means to live in a healthy environment, or how the relationship other living beings would be. One gets an impression of it by the indigenous people still living on this earth, but only an impression. What is if a kind genetic memory is switched on, of some pro-nature kind? We see everywhere how bad it is. Biodiversity is declining massively. We are in a mass extinction. If you look at the insects alone, people always like to say, oh, they're such sensitive people. You just can't do anything about it, and so on. Or it is because of the peculiarity of the place Pandora, which looks so great. But doesn't know each one of us breathtaking landscapes where one's heart rises? To put it in Jake Sully's words, the Na'vi have a deep love and connection with nature, Aiwa. And I say, here are many people who feel a deep love and connection to Gaia. And mother trees we have too. There are not so many differences. The film is of course visually well done. The music makes a lot with the people. But in our system, it's wanted to be presented as a kind of disease when we would like to have it how it should be instead of how it is. It is always said that this or that is not possible. If it's about real environmental protection, we don't really know what's possible. I think a lot. The actions which are forced on us here are unfortunately not effective. A theme of indigenous people is, of course, the pineal gland. Psychedelics have been used here. Many are familiar with ayahuasca, which is why I was in Peru. And those who know my work know about the pineal gland
DMT and all this. So the neurotransmitters that are produced in certain experiments and so on. But the sensation is that these psychedelics, which are related to this condition and the pineal gland, can now be prescribed to people with PTSD. Ecstasy, magic mushrooms, things like that. And here we come to the subject of the pineal gland. Especially when you come across the subject of ayahuasca, it becomes an increasing topic. Spoiler alert! Where was the substance taken from the whales in Avatar 2? Where is it located? I noticed it immediately. I say no more here. I don't want to spoiler the film. It's really, really great. The pineal gland. A unique small organ in the center of our brain, as we see here. It is also called the epiphysis or pineal gland or pineal organ. René Descartes had already called it the seat of the soul. It develops in the fetus 1 week after the heart has formed. This might be a sign of how important it actually is. It is the director of all other glands, responsible for the timing of many enzymes. It is also called the master gland, but that does not mean that the other glands are less important. The pineal gland is best known for regulating the day and night rhythm and melatonin synthesis, the neurotransmitter that is important for sleep and so on. The best book on the topic pineal gland is by the biophysicist Dieter Breuers. Pineal gland disclosure. Everything is in it, also references. Another topic that is important to me is to remind everyone is that we are electromagnetic beings. Think about our brain. How does it work? With electricity, as shown here in the picture. Okay, this is a computer model, but you get the idea. This happens via charged ions, such as sodium, potassium. I will spare you the explanation of the generation of electric currents across the cell membrane. That's topic in conventional textbooks. I simply would like to remind again that we are electromagnetic beings which interact with certain fields via e.g. the magnetites in the brain. We have a large measurable field around the brain, a much larger one around the heart, etc. We have an energy field surrounding us, which is still measurable at a distance of several meters and so on and on. A current topic of this time is the Schumann frequency, the solar storms, CMEs, as well as all the other frequencies that belong to nature. They are invisible but not less important. This is the YouTube channel of the geophysicist Stefan Burns, who does a lot of educational work on these topics. This is a huge field and the related studies are also always linked underneath. Or the expert in the German-speaking area is also Dieter Breuers. I have selected this slide only because all known biologic interactions with Earth's natural resonate energies are shown. The brain, heart, and nervous system, DNA, and so on. And here is a more recent study showing that this can influence decisions, for example. A very good film or documentary about the solar storms is Solar Revolution by Dieter Breuers. Do not be irritated by the year. It is more relevant than ever. Here, many scientists report about their research on the topic of the sun, human consciousness, etc. Here, additionally, I simply would like to remind that we are connected to the cosmos through the biogeochemical cycles. I won't go into more detail, but it's important to understand that we don't live under sealed domes. There are interactions on both sides. Even if we do not see it, it exists and influences us. Here it is shown how the eruption of an underwater volcano in Tonga disrupted satellite signals halfway around the world. So we are not living under a glass dome. In this context, it is also interesting that scientists at the MIT have discovered that life starts with a pattern of waves. These are like the pattern of tornadoes, water vortices, a basic mechanism. There is a beautiful video about it, which I cannot show due to copyright reasons. So there is still a lot to find out, and we are simply also vibrational beings. I would like to continue a little further here. It took a long time for epigenetics to find its way into medicine, even though it was there for decades. And there is so much more of which nothing or little is known. Like this, electroculture gardening is trending. I have already noticed, but have not yet tried it myself. There are spirals like copper attached to a certain place in the pot or soil with which frequencies, energies are positively influenced for the plant growth and yield. There are many videos of uses that look very promising. Many think this is bullshit, but already in the late 80s, a researcher found that trees grew faster under the polar lights. In the early 1900s, this was scientifically studied in England and I believe also in Germany with great success. Then came the wars and also the starvation. There had to be more mass instead of quality, as explained earlier. This one has been forgotten. At that time, artificial fertilizer aced on plants almost like a miracle. This here was simply not investigated further. But it is trending now. Here is an article in the Washington Post about that topic. Here we come again to the edible wild plants that also grow everywhere in gaps on the streets. A city planner in Santiago de Compostela has noticed that these so-called weeds cool the temperature by 30 degrees. Well, trees, forests, plants in general cool the environment, of course. Clearly, if all the plants are removed, this will have an effect. It makes sense to keep the cooling plants instead of cutting and spraying everything to death. It is important to remember this knowledge again. We just recently heard that photosynthesis is for idiots. Well, I have a different view. It was found that plants form so-called Bose-Einstein condensates during photosynthesis. Briefly summarized, this is very unusual. This condition could otherwise only be reproduced under strictly controlled conditions near zero. And then it was suddenly discovered that on a normal warm summer day, under anything but strictly controlled conditions, this is happening all around us in nature. And that's sensational, but almost nobody understands it.
And for those who say photosynthesis, therefore quantum physics, is only for idiots, I would like to quote Nobel Prize winner Richard Feynman, who said, "I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics." Then many people don't know that Dr. Gerald Pollack discovered the fourth phase of water years ago. In addition to gaseous, ice-like and liquid form, another phase of water was discovered, which also forms at interfaces. As I said, Jerry Pollack, very interesting. We also know very little about the sea. A huge underground reservoir with 3 times as much water on the surface oceans was discovered almost 1 decade ago. There are other conditions here too. Perhaps there will soon be a 5th phase of water, in connection with rocks or something. I don't know how they would classify this, but there is so much that is unknown. A mysterious golden egg was recently found on the ocean floor of Alaska. Nobody knows what it is. It seems to be organic in nature. The researchers joke about it, like in a horror movie, an alien could jump out. But there is a lot to find out. Science is dynamic. That's just part of it. And there's always something new to be discovered. Like this case, the Homo naledi, a human species that buried their people and carved symbols long time before humans and only had 1/3 size of our brains. The problem is that brain size is still equated with intelligence. Even if this is controversially discussed, we are still very vain about our big brains. I say, you also have to be able to use it, but okay. Homo naledi buried his dead and probably also performed a kind of ritual. They were conscious, probably about life after death. And that's just blowing up the theory, little brain means unconscious. Somehow that doesn't fit. They were apparently aware of life after death. And that is not unusual in science. That a theory gets blown up, although this is not really shown to the public. Textbooks would have to be rewritten, but ultimately it is constantly moving. So, what are we doing now? Looks pretty ugly. Yes, you could say that, or not. Even if, especially in Germany, the representation is very one-sided. Okay, like everywhere else in the world. Many people have understood that they have to start in their own garden, in their own world, which doesn't mean to stop helping others. You know what I mean. Here are the mushrooms, a good choice, for example. Important for soil cleaning and regeneration. Bacteria also, like effective microorganisms. I let them clean up a heating oil leak in the driveway just a few days ago. It's gone. Great, right? At least it works for me. I don't know how it is with others. But you have to pay attention to the soil so that it doesn't acidify. This intelligent network that runs through the world's soil produces fruiting bodies for us that we call mushrooms. And mushrooms are great too. Many nutrients, substances used in TCM, etc. A very interesting topic in biomedicine. But mushrooms, like algae, can do much more. Paul Stamets' lectures on this are highly recommended. Here I can only refer again to Professor Otterpohl with its humus formation and regenerative agriculture. Gartenring.org, the spherical harmonization according to Majid Abdelaziz, desert greening. Who knew that the desert in Algeria was being greened? already years ago, within a few years. This is a possibility. In any case, we should start thinking differently, because with classical thinking, we have let ourselves get into this crap. So this is a great thing and worth researching about it. Or eatable wild plants and parks. That could be implemented directly. This all also influences the microclimate and then the macroclimate. It's only concentrated about the macroclimate, whether man-made or not man-made or not man-made carbon dioxide and so on. It's about accompanying nature in healing. That's what we have to learn. We can still find our place there again before we are getting repelled. Let's get to this funny post about trees. Self-replicating carbon dioxide removal machine. Biological, automatic, uncarbonizing machine. In short, Baum, the German word for tree. And trees are so much more. The example of trees, I speak the same way for the sea. They not only spend us food in the form of fruits or leaves, etc., and natural products, substances that we breathe in while bathing in the forest, support our health and regeneration. They are spending us healthy soil. It's so much more than only carbon dioxide. We have various problems that need to be addressed, but are still totally ignored. I hope that more and more people recognize this, that they regain their strength and start in their own environment. If you don't have a garden, you can put an earthworm box in your kitchen. If you do it right, it doesn't stink. Throw the organic waste in there, and over time it creates humus, and then give it to the tree at the street. It will be happy about it. Many small actions can make a big difference. Ultimately, it's about understanding one more thing. The most important and strongest epigenetic factor in nature and also for us: freedom. Using wild plants as an example. Through this epigenetic factor, freedom, the full potential can be exploited. But that also means dangers. For example, they could be eaten, etc. At least that's not different for us. The biggest and most important epigenetic factor is freedom. That's why 15-minute cities, despite the nice view, won't work, by the way. With that in mind, I've probably forgotten a lot of what I wanted to say, but from Bose-Einstein condensate to photosynthesis and back to natural products is actually enough, I guess. I hope you were able to gain something from this. The presentation can be found on my Telegram channel. There are many mainstream sources listed. I focused on that. When I wrote my book in 2016, it was already about these topics, and this time it was relatively easy to find such sources. A lot has happened since then. Use this for yourself. Do your own research. I can't cover every topic that I've only briefly touched on here to the satisfaction of everyone. They are so complex that various professors and their teams can spend their entire life studying them, especially quantum physics. And with that in mind, I wish you all the best.